You've probably heard about Pol Pot and the Khmer Rouge, right? You know that Cambodia became a killing field. Maybe you've seen the statistics. 2 million people dead, roughly a quarter of the entire population, 1 in 4. But here's the thing nobody really talks about, my friend. This wasn't just some isolated madness, some random dictator losing his mind in the jungle. This was the most brutal economic restructuring in modern history. And it didn't happen in a vacuum. The US, China, and Cold War politics had everything to do with it. The genocide wasn't accidental, it was policy. Let me break down what actually happened, buddy. When the Khmer Rouge took over Cambodia in 1975, they had a very specific vision for the country. They called it Year Zero. Sounds apocalyptic, right? But Year Zero was really just ultra-radical agrarian communism with a body count. The idea was simple: empty the cities, send everyone to work the fields, erase the entire educated class, wipe away all of capitalism, all of commerce, all of the money systems. Pure peasant revolution. Sounds kind of romantic if you ignore the mass executions. But the economic logic underneath it? That was where things got absolutely genocidal. Because to eliminate the old economy completely, you had to eliminate the people who ran it. Every merchant, every intellectual, every professional had to die. You had to kill the knowledge itself. You had to kill the institutions. You had to wipe the economic slate clean through mass murder. But why Cambodia? Why 1975? You can't understand the Cambodian genocide without understanding what happened before it, the U.S. bombing campaign. See, during the Vietnam War, the U.S. wasn't just bombing North Vietnam. They were also secretly bombing Cambodia. We're talking about 2.7 million tons of ordnance dropped on a country that wasn't even officially in the war, for years. Hundreds of thousands of people died. Entire villages evaporated, the infrastructure collapsed. The rural economy was devastated. Families were destroyed. And the population that survived? They were radicalized. They were desperate. They were angry. They had lost everything. When the Khmer Rouge promised to save Cambodia and rebuild it from nothing, to create a new nation free from foreign interference and colonial exploitation, the bombed-out countryside listened. The bombing destabilized the government. It radicalized the peasants. It set the stage perfectly for revolution. Sometimes revolutions are just the chickens coming home to roost. The cities were full of colonial wealth. Merchants, traders, intellectuals, people who had profited from the French colonial system and the subsequent American involvement, people with money, skills, and networks. These weren't the revolutionary heroes the Khmer Rouge needed, so they became targets. The Khmer Rouge identified intellectuals, academics, people who spoke French, people who wore glasses, literally. Glasses meant you read, and reading made you dangerous to the regime. They killed them. Teachers, engineers, doctors, lawyers, gone. Anyone connected to money, to trade, to the old system. Anyone who represented competing power bases and competing knowledge systems. Anyone with skills that couldn't be controlled. This wasn't random violence or ideological purification. This was calculated economic elimination. You can't build a totalitarian planned economy if there are merchants and intellectuals and professionals with their own knowledge and their own networks. Those networks are a threat. Those skills are a threat. That knowledge is a threat. So you destroy all of it. Here's where it gets really interesting, my friend. The Khmer Rouge ideology was actually pretty straightforward once you strip away all the revolutionary rhetoric. They believed in absolute state control of the economy. No private property, no money, no markets. Everyone would work in agricultural communes. Everyone would be equal. On paper, it sounds kind of utopian, right? Everyone equal, no class system, no exploitation. But the only way to actually achieve that is through absolute totalitarian control and the complete obliteration of any alternative. And obliterate they did. Because any alternative represents a threat to total state power. Any independence from the state is rebellion. Any economic activity outside state control is dangerous. They emptied Phnom Penh, just ordered everyone out. Doctors, nurses, teachers, students, forced onto the roads. Those who couldn't walk fast enough were executed. Families were separated. Husbands from wives, children from parents. Why? Because family bonds were seen as competing with loyalty to the collective. Because family economics, even sharing food with your own kid, was seen as capitalism. Everything that looked like personal economic interest had to be destroyed. The family unit itself became a threat to the state monopoly on survival. You can't have strong families. You can't have networks of mutual aid. You can't have loyalty to anything except the state. Everything has to flow through the central authority. That's the only way to maintain absolute control. The killing wasn't just ideological bloodlust, though there was plenty of that. It was systematic economic restructuring. The merchant class had to die because they represented commerce and alternative sources of wealth. The urban intellectuals had to die because they represented alternative systems of thought and knowledge. The ethnic minorities had to die because they controlled certain economic niches, the Vietnamese as traders, the Chinese as merchants. The Buddhist monks had to die because they represented an alternative moral authority and an alternative system of wealth distribution through temples and alms. Every single social group that had independent economic power was systematically targeted for elimination. That's not a bug in the system. That's the whole point of totalitarianism. And the work conditions? Buddy, they were horrific. People were working in fields with barely enough to eat. A bowl of rice gruel a day. Maybe. Sometimes less. Malaria, dysentery, starvation. These killed almost as many as the bullets in the clubs. The Khmer Rouge were trying to build an agrarian utopia, but they had no idea what they were doing economically. They had no agricultural knowledge, no experience with managing large-scale farming, no understanding of crop rotation or resource distribution or logistics, no basic economic sense whatsoever. It was ideological fantasy enforced at gunpoint. Harvests failed because the people doing the work were starving and often had no training whatsoever. The whole economic system was collapsing while Pol Pot insisted everything was working perfectly. The gap between revolutionary fantasy and economic reality was paid for in human lives. The bodies were the cost of ideology, and the cost was getting paid every single day in rice paddies across the country. But here's the kicker, my friend. The Khmer Rouge never could have taken or held power without foreign backing. China was crucial. They provided weapons, training, and diplomatic support. Soviet support was absent, which meant the Khmer Rouge had a completely free hand. After the Vietnamese invasion of Cambodia in 1978 finally stopped the genocide, guess who the West supported at the United Nations? The Khmer Rouge. Not the government that had stopped the killing, not the government trying to rebuild from the ashes. No, the West, locked in Cold War thinking, supported the genocidal regime because it was an enemy of Vietnam, which was an enemy of the U.S. The Khmer Rouge kept a seat at the UN for years. Western countries voted to recognize them as the legitimate government of Cambodia. This wasn't ancient history embarrassment. This was open, explicit, ideological Cold War calculation. Better a genocidal regime than a communist-aligned government. The math of great power politics doesn't care about 2 million dead peasants. Geopolitics trumps morality every single time. Always has, always will. The West chose strategy over conscience. The economic destruction lasted decades. Cambodia's infrastructure was obliterated. Its merchant class was gone. Its educated population was decimated. The social fabric had been completely shattered. When the genocide finally ended and people tried to rebuild, they were starting from absolute zero. No capital, no trained workers, no institutional knowledge, no commercial networks. The trauma itself became economic. Entire families had to be rebuilt from psychological devastation. The economy couldn't recover because the people who knew how to build economies had been murdered. So, when you think about the Cambodian genocide, here's what I want you to remember, buddy. Don't think about it just as random brutality or ideological insanity, though it was absolutely brutal and insane. Think about it as a case study in what happens when you try to completely restructure an economy from the top down using violence. Think about what happens when you eliminate every single check on state power. Think about the consequences of destroying every competing economic class and social structure. Think about what the elimination of all alternatives really looks like. And think about what happens when you do it all with the cynical backing of foreign powers playing Cold War games for their own strategic advantage. That's the materialist story. That's the economic base beneath the horrifying superstructure. That's the part of history that matters if you want to understand how power works and what happens when it goes completely unchecked. The body count wasn't a side effect. The body count was the economic policy. That's the lesson we should never forget.